Hello, today we're going to talk about the Kuali Form Designer. This tool allows a user to create dynamic forms to facilitate a variety of business processes. This tool is used in the Kuali App Builder, protocols, and conflict of interest applications. This is the first video in a series that will explore several aspects of the Form Designer tool. Today we're going to look at the basic structure of a form and how the most common field gadgets work. So here we're in an initial form. We have a page gadget that's already added for us. Some of the applications support multiple pages or multiple screens in a form. And so if you have several page gadgets, the applications that support this particular gadget will render the contents of those pages as an individual screen, and a user will be able to finish, say, a series of themed questions around a particular portion of what you're asking, and then move on to the next page and complete the answers on that subsequent page and any subsequent pages that you set up. The advantage of this is you can control how much information is thrown at the user all at once, and you can cut your forms up into manageable chunks. In this case, this is just the basic form designer tool, and so we're not going to go into paging in great detail. We're going to keep all of our demonstration within this particular page. We see here we have a section on this page, and it's called Project Details. Now I'm going to go into the Project Details gadget, and we can look at a little bit of the information that's set up in this particular section. So the label at the top is called Project Details, and we see we have the option of whether or not to display this label on the form. In most cases, especially for a main section like this, the very top level of your form, you will want to display the section label. There are times where you might want to have an invisible section that exists only for organizational purposes or to build more complex display logic into your form. We'll go into those features in more detail in later videos, but that is the primary reason why you might not want to display the section header of your form. Next, there is Section Help. The Section Help doesn't really do much with this particular gadget, so I'm not going to be talking about it in detail, but I will be talking about Section Help in more detail on future gadgets. The next area is Progressive Disclosure. There's no real way for me to set up progressive disclosure logic now because I don't have any actual gadgets in the form that a user could answer, but the way that this feature works is you can add lines of logic. If question A is answered yes, then display a follow-up. If questions B, C, and D are all answered purple, then display this entire section of the form. And so you can set a form up in a way that the user only sees the questions they need to answer. It helps minimize a user being overwhelmed by having to process too much information on a form, and information that might not actually be pertinent to them. We'll go into progressive disclosure in more detail in a future video, but I did just want to detail out that this is what this part of the gadget configuration is for. The last option for the section is Show Wrapper. I'll be detailing Show Wrapper and its uses in more detail in a later video. This allows you to completely hide the wrapper and the visible aspect of the section. Again, this is part of something that would be used if you wanted to do an invisible section and not have it actually display in the form. You can hide the wrapper and display the header, and I'll go into that in more detail when we get into advanced layout. So that's some of the basic structure of a gadget. In this case, we were looking at our section gadget. Now we want to go in, and I'm going to click Add Item, and we can add a little bit more information about this form. So first, I'm going to click on Read Only Text. This is probably the simplest gadget next to section, and this isn't actually a question. Read Only Text could be used to put a block of information or instructions at the top of a page. It can be used to give follow-up to a question. If a question is answered in a certain way, then you know perhaps that the user needs to follow up with their compliance office and get permission to do certain things or move forward with a form. or you want to then send them out to guidance if they answer a question a certain way and say, it is likely that you will have to follow these additional processes or be aware of these additional regulations. Here is a link out. And that's what this gadget is typically used for. It's not a question. The user will not have to put any information into a read-only text gadget when they complete the form. We do have to put a general label. I'm going to put instructions, and I'm going to click off display on the form, and you'll see why in a second. The next area is the read-only text long, and the label itself can really only hold a small amount of non-formatted information, about 35 characters. You can't do any formatting, you can't do line breaks, and a lot of times you might want to put in complex formatted instructions, bulleted lists, as I said, links out. And for that, you need the long label. And so we have our read-only text long label here. And I will put, thank you for submitting the details of your project to the compliance office. Please complete all of the questions below as completely as possible and submit the form. If you have questions, you can email compliance@university.edu. And so these are the instructions. And we want compliance@university.edu to be a link. So we can highlight that and we can click on the link, and it automatically detects, oh, this is going to be a mail to link. It can tell that's an email. I can hit save, and now this is a link out. And so you can see how that's a lot more useful than just a general read-only instructions label that you can't do much with. We could also highlight or underline, but we're going to stay fairly simple with this. So I'm going to hit save. And now we want to put in our first couple questions. I'm going to do a few demo questions so we can talk through the most common configurations that are available. And so first I want to talk about general text input. So there are 3 types of text input that are available. There's text input, and that will give you a single line field. If you're asking for something like a protocol number or an ID, a license number, something like that, you probably want text input. It won't take up as much screen space. It'll just be more efficient. And if you're not likely to ever need more than 1 line worth of text, this is ideal. Text area is almost exactly like text input, except it can be multiple lines. And this gadget will expand and get longer as the user adds additional information. So it will scale to the scope of the information they need to put in. If you need to have delivery instructions or a project description or procedure descriptions for certain scientific details, then you might want to use this gadget. The third text gadget that's available is the rich text gadget, and that looks exactly like the form field long editor that I just showed you. It allows the user to do bulleted lists, add some formatting. In general, this gadget isn't used as often, but especially on, say, a protocol form where you want to give the user the opportunity to add some more detail and they're going to do a very long procedural description, you might want to use the rich text gadget to give them some options in how they structure that data. In this case, I'm going to use text area. For the field label, I'm going to put project description. And I'm going to hide that. Again, I want a longer description. The reason we still need field label is because that's the label that's going to appear on reporting. It's a quick identifier that you can use when exporting data, when looking at this data in a manage files interface in the application, or potentially when we get into some of the application-specific gadgets in later videos, you'll see there are applications where you might have a long description for a field collection, which is called a list, but you still want a short label because you might be in a tabular view of that data and you need something for the column header. So we still want to define project description. Now we have this new field called field key. This is the machine name of this field. This is what, if you wanted to do a data conversion and populate data in, you would use this field key when sending data to the APIs or calling data back from the APIs. And it's generally just what the system uses to identify a field. It's also used in identification when doing progressive display as an absolutely unique identifier. I don't have to put in a field key. If I finalize this without a field key, it will derive a field key automatically from the field label. And if that field key ends up being a duplicate, because you are allowed to have the same field label multiple times, and in certain cases that makes sense, like a please explain field might show up multiple times in a long functional form, then it will put a number at the end of whatever it derives, 1, 2, 3, in order to make sure that field is unique. So I'm going to show you what that looks like, but you can override that by typing in your own field if you want. Now we're going to get to field label long, and this is going to be what actually displays on the form. So here I'm going to put, please put a comprehensive description of your project activities. We won't use put. Please comprehensively describe your project activities. And so now we have a somewhat longer field label. In this case, I'm not going to do any other formatting. We're just going to kind of talk through the rest of the options on the form. Now we get down to field help, and this is an area where the field help is useful as opposed to the section. And so we could put here, if you want guidelines on acceptable project activities, see the university policies for projects. And so now we can make this a link. And now that we've kind of built up our field, we can go to the top, and in the field preview, it will show us what everything looks like. Now here you can see that the field help just went down on another line. And it really doesn't look that different from if we had just used the formatting in field label long as an option. And there are cases where you might want to do this, and it's called displaying an inline, but there is another option. If I turn off display inline in form, then we can have a pop-up. Now you can see with the pop-up, it's not very easy for me to get to the link. In fact, it's not possible for me to get to the link. So there are cases where certain features may or may not be useful depending on how you want the data to display. Everything's kind of available all the time. You just have to make decisions and test your form as you go through this. So really, if I wanted to have the link there, I could probably just build that into field label long. But if I wanted to have pop-up guidance about this field, then I could display it with this non-inline field help. Then we have progressive disclosure. We also have this field width. And I'm not going to use field width here. I'll be going into this in more detail in a later video that talks about layout. But this lets you control how many fields will display on each, basically, row of your form. So you can set up small fields like name or lead unit to appear next to each other so the user doesn't have to scroll as far on their form. The other option we have here is placeholder text. And so I can put in some placeholder text, and if we go up here, we can see that it displays that in a grayed out form at the top of my field. It's kind of nice because it lets you know where you have to click. It's very visually useful in that respect, so I know exactly where my field of typing is, and as soon as I start typing, that gray text disappears. So those are really all the pieces of a text field, and your various text fields are going to have those same basic settings and options. So we can go ahead and save that. And then I'm going to add another item, and I'm going to talk about the multi-select fields. There are a number of different multi-select fields that are available in the system. There are checkboxes, radio buttons, and drop-down lists. Radio buttons and drop-down lists are both options where you can only choose one of the multi-select answers that you set up in the system. So yes, no would likely be radio buttons. If you only have a couple answers, 2 or 3, radio buttons is a great solution. The user can see exactly what their answers are, they can answer them very quickly with one click, and they can move on. If you get into a situation where you have 7, 8, 10 different answers, or your answers are set up in one of those field collections that I mentioned earlier, and you don't want it to take up as much space, you want the gadget to be a little bit smaller, then drop-down lists make more sense because they're a smaller layout on the form. And I'll show you how each of those look. Checkboxes are a little bit different. They're set up where you have to see all of the answers on the form, so even a long list will need to all display because checkboxes allow you to select multiple answers. Whereas radio buttons and drop-downs, you can only choose one answer. With checkboxes, you can choose 2, 3, 5, however many answers you need to select, which is often appropriate. So first, I'm going to set up radio buttons. And we have our same field label set up, and I'm going to put project restricted as my label. And again, we don't want that to display. That's for our column headers reporting later. Is your project subject to the restricted categories defined in University Policy C1. And again, we can set this up as a link. And we can save that. And then when we go to the bottom, we have the same other fields like the help and the width and the progressive disclosure, but now we can add options. And so we can enter the answers that the user can select for this particular question. In this case, I really asked a yes-no question, so I'll put my options as yes and no. We can go back up to the top, look at our field preview, and that looks really good. And so then I can hit save. So next, I'm going to do drop down just so you can see the difference. And we'll put category. List the category of your project. And so now we have the same basic configuration and the same options. I will put 4 selections. Category A, Category B, Category C, Category D. We will hit save, and then the last option I'm going to put in is I am going to put in some checkboxes. And I will put in participating units. And for our field label long, we will put list all units participating in your project. And here we'll again put 5 options. We'll put biochemistry, physics, music, ethnomusicology, and business. And then we can hit save. So that covers all of the multi-select gadget types. There are a couple other gadgets I want to mention, and those are the number input and the date picker. These have a little bit less configuration associated with them, and so I'm going to show them here and just put an example of them in. So if we choose date picker, I can put start date. And again, we won't display that on the form. When will your project start? And if we look down, We have the placeholder option again, but that's really the only configuration. And as you'll see with the date picker, there isn't a real need for the placeholder option. So I'm going to hit save there, and that will select a date when the user fills it out. And the next is the number input. This is like the text input, but the user has to select a number. So I will put how many, well, we'll put duration. Again, we don't want to display on the form. And in field label long, how many months will your project last? So we can see this, and you can see when I mouse over the field, these arrows appear. And so it doesn't let me complete data here, but you'd be able to go up or down, or you could type in a number. So I will hit save, and now you've seen the basic configuration for the most common gadgets. So then I can go down into edit mode, and now we can see what our form looks like. We can see our help, and we can see our instructions up top. I can put in a project description. And here I can answer this question very quickly, and then if you look at the list of categories, you can see what the drop-down looks like. And so you could imagine with a long list of 7 or 8 items, the radio buttons would take up a lot of space. And then I can choose a couple units that are collaborating. And then when I click on when will the project start, I'm given a date selector. And so I can choose the date that my project will start, and then I can either use the arrows to select a number. They're a little bit small though, so I can also just type in the number as necessary. I hope this was useful as a brief introduction to the options that are available in gadgets and the basic options that are available in terms of sections and the makeup of the form designer. I hope that you'll come back and join us for our next video where we will talk about layout in the form designer in a little bit more detail.